You're listening to Myth and the Search for Meaning, a book club podcast. Today we're discussing Anne Carson's translation of Orestes, an ancient Greek tragedy about a young man who killed his mother. I'm Jane.
I'm Nate. I have a theory about Orestes that I want to float by you. Feel free to shoot this down if you don't agree with it. But my
Mhm.
thought is that most ancient Greek tragedies are about one individual person's pain. So in Oedipus Rex, for example, the experience that you're getting is watching Oedipus suffer. But in
Mhm.
Orestes, it's really not about experiencing pain, it's about watching someone you love experience pain.
I had not considered it that way, but that totally makes sense. I completely believe it. It is very much a play about relationship, about the ways that we are bound to each other. And I mean, I feel like that fits perfectly in with that whole sort of broader idea that we watch the people we love suffer and that we suffer for it.
So there is this line from the play that gets plastered all over Instagram, all over Tumblr. It's
Mhm.
a short exchange between Pylades and Orestes, who are best
Mhm.
friends.
Mhm.
Would you like to be Pylades for our line reading?
Yes. If I could, there we are. I'll take care of you.
It's rotten work,
Not to me. Not if it's you.
which absolute banger. The
Oh,
original
it's
reason
so good.
the original reason that I read this play is because I saw that one line on Tumblr. It goes so
Mhm.
fucking hard.
I reblogged that line on Tumblr. I mean, if it's less than a dozen times, I'd be surprised.
Countless times for me as well. So this play was performed at Athens. Jane, how many people do you think could fit in the original theater?
I'm gonna guess it's definitely more than, 3,000.
It is somewhere between 15,000 and 16,000, according to an UNESCO United Nations estimate. So
Oh my god.
I have seen some lower estimates. The lowest I've seen is 14,000, but that's still huge.
Well, I believe it's the case in Athens that the Dionysian festival, which is where this premiered at, it was sort of like a mandatory event for all citizens,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's like the community coming together. And all of the plays that get performed that year in Athens happen over the span of 4 days. So,
Mhm.
imagine if every single movie for the entire year was released over the course of 4 days, and the fourth night we had the Oscars, and everyone you know was there the entire time.
Sounds kinda fun.
So, there is a theory. It's widely accepted, although not universally accepted among people who study this stuff, that tragedies only had 3 actors and then a
Mhm,
chorus, which is like a gigantic assembly of people
mhm.
all speaking simultaneously. Why do you think only 3?
I mean, it certainly makes productions easier to put on, I would say. It means you don't have people jockeying over being given, the minor role when there's only 3 roles. You're all gonna have a lot of stage time. I mean, obviously, when I hear 3, I think of, Trinity and symbolism stuff, which is not the answer here. Um, why do people think that?
So we're not entirely sure why it was the case. The thing you
Mhm,
mentioned of just the ease of assigning roles, that actually is a theory that real archaeologists have proposed. But
mhm,
the hypothesis that I find most persuasive is just they didn't have modern sound equipment. And so it was difficult to find someone who could be heard by 16,000 people all at once, like someone who was able to
mhm,
physically talk that loud. And
mhm.
so you didn't want to go out of your way to find too many people.
What was theaters, though, also, engineered to amplify the sound of human voices?
They were. I don't think it was as effective as theaters that get engineered for that sort of thing today.
Well,
And
yeah.
it was an outdoor theater, so I don't
Mhm.
know the extent to which that would have like could a wind cancel something like that out, you know?
Yeah. Oh, no, the Dionysia got rained out.
Oh
Um,
no, we're all gonna die. Dionysus is mad at us.
yeah, yeah, actually. I think it's so fascinating how much attention classical Athens gets for such a small town. The county seat of where I live in Georgia has about the same amount of population as ancient Athens did. The county seat that, even if I said the name, no one would have heard of it. It's fascinating to me because it really shows you just how much potential there is in everybody. Because ultimately, like Athens, yes, did have its own fascinating cultural reasons to have produced so much interesting stuff. But the people producing it were just people who happened to be in an interesting cultural situation. Whenever I think about it, I always am reminded of that quote. I did look it up earlier. It's by Stephen Gould. I'm somehow less interested in the weight and convolution of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops. I think you can replace that with Plato, with Aristotle, with Euripides, any of these ancient and Athenian people that we respect, and it's still true. I mean, if one small town can have such a prolific output on intellectual history, it means that it's within all of us. Have you ever considered Athens as a small town before?
I had, yeah, in my freshman year philosophy classes, we read, or maybe not, classical literature classes, let's say, because it wasn't perfectly philosophy, but we read Aristophanes' play The Clouds, in which there's
Great
a
one.
character named Socrates.
Mhm.
And my professor made this like interesting point to me, which is every single person in Athens living at that time had seen Socrates. They might not have spoken to him, they might not have like known him very well, but he was just like walking around in such a small area that they would have all known what he looked like.
Yeah, that's great. I like that a lot. I This notion was also given to me in a college class. I took one on ancient Greece, and when we were in sort of the archaeology side of it in like the beginning of the class, and then transitioning into the more like philosophy side of it, this was brought up a lot, like to highlight the fact that like all this archaeology stuff that talks about these smaller settlements and everything else is still the same thing as this great classical Athens. You know?
And then I also think some of it just has to do with like what has survived and what hasn't. You know, like I'm sure that people were producing things that were like just as interesting, but so much of their cultural artifacts got like either stolen or burned by colonial forces, which like a lot of unfortunate things have happened in the city of Athens, but that's not one of them, you know? So in some sense it is survivorship bias, but I think that only like further validates your point of like everyone has the potential to produce something just as interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's always it's I don't know. Whenever I think about Athens for too long, I always get caught up in that.
Mhm. So ancient Greek tragedies work like by Spider-Man rules, where you're already familiar with the rough outline of the story. You know how like the most recent like Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, they don't even bother like showing him get bit by a spider because you already know. And so the text is like reliant on your foreknowledge of the overarching canon. In the case of Orestes by Euripides, the audience would have already known the protagonist via oral tradition and also via another set of plays called the Oresteia, which was written by Aeschylus. So here is my 8 point summary of the Oresteia. Part 1: Agamemnon wants to go kill a bunch of Trojans, but to do that, he needs the wind to blow for his sailboats. Part 2: he sacrifices his daughter Iphigenia to make that happen. It works, and then he goes and does the plot of Homer's Iliad. Part 3: when he comes back from the war, his wife Clytemnestra is understandably pissed about it. Part 4: Clytemnestra kills Agamemnon. And my reaction to that is like, yay, Clytemnestra, thank you for inventing feminism. But the general reaction of the ancient Greek audience would not have been positive. They would have presumably been siding with Agamemnon. I don't know why I made that a step in my summary, but step 6: Clytemnestra banishes her son Orestes so that he can't avenge his father, Agamemnon. Step 7, Orestes grows up, comes back, and conspires with his other sister, Electra, to kill their mom, Clytemnestra. And part 8, Orestes' best friend Pylades is also there, heart emoji. So, to summarize, dad kills daughter, mom kills dad, son and other daughter, and son's best friend kill mom. Do you have any general thoughts on the
Did
canon
you did not
before
particularly
Euripides
mention
steps in?
Aegisthus, which I obviously Aegisthus is not that important for this particular play, but Aegisthus is Clytemnestra's let's say affair partner while Agamemnon is off at war, and he also takes part in the whole let's kill your husband thing, and also then gets killed by her children.
Not the stepdad. He's the dad who
Yeah,
stepped
sure, let's
up
go with
and
that.
then got killed. No, I agree. I didn't mention him because I don't think he gets mentioned in Orestes, but he is a big part of the Oresteia.
I think he's mentioned like two different times.
Is he?
Yeah, I was confused about if he had even been killed yet for a second, and then they mentioned killing him, and I was like, okay, cool, that's what I thought.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah. So one thought that I had about this story is it might just be about like because ancient Greeks were like in a near perpetual state of warfare, like willingness to sacrifice one's children for the benefit of the state was like a very important social value in their
Mhm,
culture. Normally the sons just by sending them off to war,
mhm.
but I do think it's interesting that like those original myths are so calcified around the idea that killing Iphigenia was the correct choice. And I, in my culture, look at that and I'm like, dog, Clytemnestra got it right and won. You know?
No, I completely understand that. I feel like this is a big problem that you run into with the Iliad is it's very easy to side with the Trojans about the whole thing
Hmm.
because keep seeing the Greeks be acting horribly to women. And also, a lot of people in modern day sort of see Helen and Paris running away as kind of like a love match thing. So they see it as well, Helen is with her love, and like, why do we need to bring the entire Greek army over because of like one guy, wife not liking him, you know? And
Hmm.
I feel like that's a very easy thing to go into. I feel like Hector is also a much more likable hero than Achilles for a lot of modern readers. And this just
100%.
Yeah, and this just plays into that same sort of idea where ultimately, like, ancient Greek values are not our own values. I will say that it's super interesting the fact that family murder is very specifically like what kind of dooms the line of the House of Atreus. Um, for anybody not totally aware, the House of Atreus is Orestes and his father Agamemnon's like ancestral line. Goes back a couple generations, and the thing that like is the thing that nobody likes is Tantalus was a son of Zeus, as everybody was, evidently. And the gods come over for dinner one night, and he doesn't have a suitable meal for them, or he like wants to make a really good meal for them. So he's like, "Oh, let me kill my son, Pelops, and then serve him to the gods as food." Which is a bad time for everybody involved. And then poor Pelops gets put back together by the gods, but Demeter ate a little bit of his shoulder, so his shoulder's a little messed up now. But it's interesting to see that like that initial act dooms Tantalus to Tartarus, and then it also sort of puts in line all of these things that happened for his children and all of this family murder that's going to keep happening on. I think he's their great grandfather, I want to say. I could be wrong about that.
That sounds right.
Anyway.
Yeah, and it's like such a patriarchal society too. Like I feel like the authority of the father, of course, is like wildly emphasized in American culture, but even like relative to Greeks, I feel like Americans don't lean into it quite as much, and like the subversion of the father's will is such like a big quote unquote problem in this literature.
I think I can't remember the word I said that one time that made you laugh maniacally, but to link this to infanticide, as I am wont to do,
I think the word was infanticide.
Oh, okay.
This is future Nate in the editing room. Infanticide is bad and you should not do it. Infanticide is not funny. What is funny is the amount of times that I have been caught off guard by infanticide coming up in our book club. It's happened like at least on 2 other occasions. This time, I probably don't have a right to be surprised. It is Orestes.
Our dear listeners, I have a habit of book club linking things to the killing of babies in as a historical practice, which you wouldn't think could come up that often, but somehow it does. Um, an interesting thing is that in sort of this classical Mediterranean context, the choice to put a baby out for exposure, basically just leaving it to die in the wilderness, was framed as sort of being solely the father's choice.
Oh, interesting. And then in this case, there's like a conflict between a mother and a father over the father's decision to kill the daughter.
Mhm. It's also fascinating because it's that sacrifice of a child for the gods. And obviously, you see different things about Iphigenia. Maybe she was spirited off by Artemis or whatever. But we see this whole line get doomed because sacrificing your children to the gods is wrong, and then they get blessed later on because sacrificing your children to the gods is right. Apparently, sometimes.
So the play Orestes by Euripides is really about the fallout of killing Clytemnestra. We don't actually see any of that on stage. When the play begins, Orestes has fallen ill. He's being persecuted by the Furies, and Electra and Pylades are taking care of him while he has these fits of madness. Meanwhile, the city of Argos prepares to execute them for killing Clytemnestra. Any thoughts on just the play in general?
I think the Furies being so present as almost like a physical force for him is quite interesting in that it also presents in a way where I'm not sure he ever explicitly says, "The Furies, they're getting me." Um, he sort of describes them and everybody already knows what's going on. I mean, even within the play, he describes to his uncle Menelaus, um, "These women are coming after me in blood," or whatever, and he's like, "Oh, I know what you're talking about." Um, the other thing about the
Yeah.
Furies I wanted to bring up is towards the end of the play, there's a very interesting exchange where he says that basically if he because he killed his mother's Furies are coming after him. But if he hadn't have killed his mother, his father's Furies would have been coming after him to avenge him.
Mhm.
And it plays into that again, that tragic idea of there is no escaping it. Like he's already bound up in the cycle of violence.
There's no winning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, it's interesting because the play is about the consequences of killing Clytemnestra, but it never denies that they have a connection. You know, I feel like there's a lot of literature in which like mother-son bonds are just like completely absent. Like I don't think we ever learned Beowulf's mother's name, for instance, but we learned the name of his father. But in this play, it's not like a positive representation, but it doesn't like glide over a mother-child bond, you know?
Mhm.
The way that Orestes' madness is described, it sounds like epilepsy, right? I think at one point he mentions foaming at the mouth, and he's
Mhm.
flailing around, he's confused, he doesn't know where he is.
Mhm.
It sounds like a seizure.
Yes, I would agree. It does sound like a seizure, or like hallucinatory, like something hallucination based. It seems deeply physical in a way that I feel like
Yeah.
madness is not necessarily always portrayed in literature.
Mhm. The Greeks definitely, like, knew about epilepsy. Hippocrates from The Oath has a short thing called The Divine Disease, where he's basically arguing that epilepsy should be understood as, like, something with physical causes as opposed to spiritual ones. This is like a really vivid depiction of someone displaying like epilepsy-like symptoms as direct result of supernatural intervention.
Yeah. It's also obviously I know foaming at the mouth can happen for epileptic seizures as well, but for I feel like in our conscience it's very linked to rabies. And that's another thing that I
Mhm.
greased out with every single summer is a bunch of people getting bitten by dogs and dying of rabies. So that would have been another form of physical madness that people were familiar with.
Do you wanna talk about the portrayal of Helen?
Yes, I do. I do want to talk about the portrayal of Helen. Helen is such a fascinating character in Greek mythology to me.
Uh-huh.
It's crazy that she is such a she's really not a person almost ever in the text she's treated as. She's treated as an inciting incident.
Mhm. Mhm. Like a plot device.
You know, nothing about her is given any sort of agency or like ability to be her own person or have these own decisions. She's only ever punished for the things that happen as a result of her being beautiful. And what I think was super
Yeah.
fascinating is at the end of the play, the Deus Ex Machina, um, Apollo straight up says that Helen is was like put on the earth as a way to get Trojans and Greeks to kill each other because there's too many people. Like,
Yeah, yeah, it's like
like
culling the land. It's
yeah,
like, "Let's
yeah.
start a war with this beautiful woman."
I gotta say, I think the flood a little more straightforward way to solve that problem.
Even that depiction doesn't necessarily give her agency. She's like a tool being used by the gods. But in this case, she's not like impiously subverting like marital norms in their culture. She's being used by divine beings to enforce their will upon humanity.
And it goes into this theme that the gods will make you do things that are bad, which I know is pretty basic, but I still think is worth pointing out. Like Apollo is he's the inciting incident for all of this. I mean, he's the one that makes Orestes compels Orestes to kill his father. Electra gets some of the blame within the play for doing that, for egging him
His
on, but it's really
his mother?
Apollo. Kill his father,
Yeah.
didn't I? I meant kill his mother.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting, we don't know the precise nature of their interaction before the start of the play. It sounds like it might have just been, like, Orestes started hearing voices, right?
Mhm.
Because later when Apollo, like, comes in the flesh and is, like, a performer on the stage, you see Orestes, like, say, like, "I was beginning to think those voices were just, like, madness or evil spirits."
Yeah, fascinating to think about like how he would know it was specifically Apollo.
Well, he has that bow, right? Like, there's at one point, he's trying to fend off the Furies, and he just, like, has a
Mhm.
bow and arrow that Apollo presumably gave him.
Mhm.
Although, like, Artemis is, of course, also associated with the bow.
Yes. Yeah, they share that one. Yeah. There's so many interesting things laying in this play. It's almost like people have been talking about it for 2,000 years for a reason.
Yeah. Another just, like, really insane thing that gets dropped in there and they breeze past it. Orestes takes Hermione hostage. Hermione is the daughter of Helen and Menelaus. When Orestes takes her hostage, Apollo shows up and he's like, "You will marry that girl who you are holding a sword to her throat. That's gonna be your wife."
Mhm.
And then Apollo says, "She was supposed to marry someone else, but I'll make sure he dies."
Yeah, it's like he's just catching strays here. What did he do?
To me, it implies like some subversion of fate, maybe? Because it sounds like Neoptolemus was destined to marry Hermione, or at least that was like the plan. I don't know if destined is the right word
I
for it.
mean, I feel like maybe they were just betrothed and the plan was always like I mean, there's human plans and there's god plans, you know?
Right, right.
I feel like we can at least know that the human plan was that they were going to get married, but who knows what the god plan was.
Do you know of Neoptolemus from other mythological sources?
I cannot say I do, no.
So I don't know if this is like the Neoptolemus in question in this play, but I know that there is a character in a play by Sophocles who is named Neoptolemus, and he is the son of Achilles,
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
which is just so funny to me that like There's all this conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles in the Iliad. And then in this play, again, not sure that this is the same Neoptolemus, but just for the sake of fun, it's interesting that there's like this sort of long distance rivalry between the son of Agamemnon and the son of Achilles.
Yeah, once you said as a son of Achilles, I was like, "Oh, yeah, that guy, that yeah." He's
No, I do that all the time.
yeah, he's one of those minor characters that, like, there's a lot of them.
So we've talked a lot about like just Apollo just appearing and kind of declaring the end of the story. It's a plot device that you already mentioned by name, Deus Ex Machina. I feel like in modern writing societies, Deus Ex Machina is really looked down upon, but it is a staple of the ancient Greek tragedy. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about like this convention that originally was so highly esteemed and like foundational to the genre and now is just so completely despised.
Well, I feel like, at least in this play, the fact that it is called a tragedy is in some way incorrect. I mean, a tragedy is meant to end with a death and a funeral. This ends with a wedding, or at least two betrothals. And the Deus Ex Machina is the whole point of that. If the gods are the ones mucking up everybody's business for the whole play by setting the tragedy in motion, then the gods are the one that have to come out and save it at the end.
I think in ancient Greek society, whether or not it was classified as a tragedy had a lot to do like on which night of the Dionysia
Yes, they were
it was
separate. I believe they
performed.
were separate contests within the Dionysia, I believe. It is kind of funny though to read a play written as a tragedy with the title character who makes it out alive.
No, for sure, for sure. And who not only makes it out alive, whose best friend marries his sister, and then Orestes also gets to get married. And now, like, kind of the three protagonists, like Orestes, well, I keep wanting to say Iphigenia, but that's not her name. Orestes, Electra, and Pylades are all now bound by marriage
Yes.
and will be like one family.
And then it also further it's another link between the Helen and Clytemnestra branch and the Agamemnon and Menelaus branch because Hermione and Orestes are double first cousins.
One last thing about the play itself before we start talking about the translator. This is the last play that Euripides wrote before he left Athens, seemingly never to return. Is this play influenced by the fact that it was like written by someone who had either already decided to leave or was imminently about to decide?
I feel like there is a streak of I don't know how much of this is just Greek gods are capricious, but do you know how Ovid has that whole thing where he's critiquing the emperor by making the gods look stupid?
I don't
Oh,
actually know.
Ovid, especially in Metamorphoses, but like I admit to not knowing this firsthand as well, but it's a very common thing that people say where whenever there's a version of a myth that we have multiple sources of, Ovid's always seems a little bit more like the gods are dumb and make dumb decisions and use humans at their whims and are like bad people in a way that they're not always in other versions of the stories. And Ovid is obviously in a let's say contentious relationship with some Roman emperors and or I believe it's just Augustus. I could be wrong about I'm not that much of a Rome girly. But all of this is to say that it's that same sort of idea where critiquing authority and critiquing the system in some ways can come through by critiquing the gods and writing them as capricious and dumb and all of this stuff as dumb. Now ultimately what he is critiquing is kind of this antiquated system of blood feuds, which, classic blood feuds, they're bad. But I mean, even the whole council just sort of voting to, stone them, even though there's people that are trying to like speak up for them, or like Menelaus not standing up for them. It all shows that this horrible situation is like being helped by the machinations of society. And you can see this more in, I would assume you could see it more in the other version of the Oresteia, where they have the whole invention of the Athenian legal system in it.
It's been a while since I've read
Mhm.
Aeschylus's version, but if my memory serves, it was like very like patriotic and like an optimistic
Mhm.
ending. Very idealizing of the origin of like the Athenian government.
Yeah. Yeah, it's myth making within myth making. It has also been a very long time since I read that. One last note that I need to bring up from my notes that I took when I was reading. Menelaus is blonde.
Yeah.
I've never seen this portrayed that way. I've never thought about him as blonde. Always imagined him as kind of like a burly Greek guy, hairy. So that was fascinating.
This is a good
Mhm,
segue because I was very ambitious and I was like, I'm going to read the Carson translation and then I'm also going to read the Oxford World Classics
mhm,
translation as well, and I'll compare them both. That absolutely did
mhm.
not happen. So I don't know, but I would not be surprised if that's something that Carson just kind of tossed in there because she thought it would be fun and might not, in fact, be in the
Mhm.
original text. That's kind of a very Carson-esque
Yeah,
move.
I feel like it probably says something about his coloring or being golden or something, and she decided to interpret it as blonde. Which, like, I know people describe Achilles as blonde,
Yeah.
so like it's not like crazy.
There's a Sappho poem which has the word glucose, meaning sweet, and Carson translates it as candy. And I'm like, well, would like they didn't have candy back then per
Mhm,
se, you know what I mean? Like she So I wrote out a little thing in the outline that I'm just gonna read verbatim because it's like the easiest way to get my thoughts out of my head. So there are two authors who contributed to this text, Euripides and the translator Anne Carson, who is an accomplished poet in her own right. She wrote Autobiography of Red, Decreation, Eros the Bittersweet. When she translates things, she leaves her fingerprints on them. So, for comparison, Emily Wilson released both original writings and translations of Homer and also Sophocles. Wilson's translations do not sound like her original writing, but Carson's translations always sound like Carson. She summed up her thoughts on the responsibilities of a translator in her essay, Variations on the Right to Remain Silent. So I'm going to try and sum up the argument that she makes in that essay, and then you can tell me whether or not you think this is like a
mhm,
fair summary. But the way I see it, Carson's point is basically one, some words are impossible to translate, and I agree with that. But then part two, therefore, all words are impossible to translate. And step three, if it's all bullshit, I can do whatever I want. Is that a fair characterization?
hmm. I would maybe say it as there are some words that are impossible to translate, and there's a certain beauty in that impossibility.
Yeah, I do think she thinks it's a
Mhm,
positive thing. Um, and a
mhm.
productive thing. I don't know. So Carson isn't like the only person with this attitude. If you think of like Chapman is the original translator of Homer into English, and do you know about Chapman's
Isn't
Odyssey?
that the one written in poetry and it took him like 7 years?
It's written in rhyming
Yes. Yeah,
couplets.
yeah. Couplet was not coming to.
It's imposing a poetic form that the original absolutely did not fucking
Mhm,
have, you know? I lean closer to liking the Wilson approach. I think of translation almost like an
mhm.
accessibility thing, like increasing the number of people who have access to the text. And so in my mind, I do get my hackles raised a little bit when Carson plays fast and loose with these sort of things because I'm like, well, but you're not allowing people to like access the original text. Sometimes in ways that are obvious, like in her translation of Antigone. Antigone just straight up starts quoting Hegel. And it's like, well, that like if you know who Hegel is, you know that Antigone did. If you know that Hegel,
Even by
like,
the fact that his name does not end in "us" or "ease."
yeah, yeah. And so like I think that's a I don't know. I think that's a fairly obvious case. And I get less up in arms about like when people read a loose translation and they can tell that it's a loose translation. Um I'm I'm doing a I don't know, playing fast and loose here because that quote that we read at the beginning is a version of Carson, like, sort of coming up with new ways of saying something that are a little bit distant from the original text. So Orestes says, it's rotten work. The original line has nothing about rottenness. So a couple people have tried to translate it, like, I say a couple, like many professional translators have tried to translate it, but I've also tried it, and I should mention that like this was several years ago when I was just a Greek student, so like take this with a grain of salt. But the version that I got is Orestes replies, "It is difficult to touch a sick man," which is like the subject is like man versus like
Mhm.
work. You know, it might not seem like a big deal, but it does mean that you're losing the original grammatical structure in a way where you could have very easily have chosen to not lose it. You know?
Okay, I might interrupt you here for a second.
Go ahead.
I think I actually kind of disagree with you on this whole thing. I think that Carson's approach to translation is I agree with her that there's a beauty in things that cannot be translated, and I think her take on it and her imposing her own voice onto the text does mean that it is no longer looking at the work of Euripides. But it was never only working at the work of Euripides, and I think that her voice being so present is not a bad thing at all. If you are not trying to view it as a direct line into being in the theater of the Dionysian festival in 408 BC, if you're viewing it as an enjoyable thing to read and something that'll still let you know about ancient Greece in some way without maybe getting caught up on the specific words and making it more readable and more enjoyable and more fun. I think this is wonderful. I've never read Anne Carson's translation before, and I honestly would pick up more of them just from reading this. It was very readable. It didn't take itself super seriously. Like, I've read a lot of translations that are trying to get into that voice that the King James Bibles has, where it's written in a language that is slightly foreign to us. And
Mhm.
notably, the King James Bible is not intended to have that language. It's done that because it's 400 years old. And I think that this is much more enjoyable to read. And as somebody that's not necessarily approaching these things from a very strict academic scholarly viewpoint, I think that's more important. And in her translation notes at the end of An Oresteia, she mentions that like part of the reason for producing this was to get Greek plays performed more. And like that's perfect. This is
Mhm.
great for getting the play performed more. It seems like it'd be very fun to watch. I think there are certain lines in this where I laughed when I was reading it, and I think the whole theater would laugh. And that's great, you know?
Yeah. And there is also like, other translators had rendered the Pylades and Orestes line in a way that like did not touch so many people on
Yeah.
the internet, so there is like a real heart and soul to her
Mhm.
translation. I completely concede that. And like just to like step on my own foot a little bit. Like one thing I will say is like Wilson, who like I just hyped up
Mhm.
so much, whenever she encounters those like words that I agree are impossible to translate, like she as much as I respect Wilson, when she stumbles across those words, she never renders them in an especially interesting way. So I'm thinking like in the Odyssey, there is a character, Circe, who is described as polypharmaku, which is like a really weird adjective that has no direct corresponding word in English. It means like many drugging, but so it's like describing Circe using the things that she creates as an adjective. There's no precise way to
Mhm.
render that, and what Wilson comes up with is goddess.
Oh.
And I'm like, "Oh, well, that's
Mhm.
no fun." And, like, I am
Honestly, I feel like Potion Master would be fun for that.
Ocean Master would be great, and I feel like I'm more sympathetic to Wilson, but I guess, like, my concession to your point is, like, I have never read an Anne Carson translation and gone like, Oh, well, that's no fun.
Yeah, yeah. There was definitely a lot of fun in this. There was one I highlighted this. Let me she's talking to Helen in the beginning of the play Electra, and it's like, "Helen, why should I say what you see with your own eyes? We're a mess." And then she talks about all the horrible things happening, and she says, "Well, let's say you've got us on a bad day." That's one of the lines that I'm like, yeah, the whole theater would laugh.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm. One thing I did want to mention that I is a little peek behind the curtain here is despite us reading Anne Carson's translation, I noticed that in our outline, and also I will admit in my notes, neither of us spelled Clytemnestra the way she does, which is quite
Yeah,
odd.
yeah.
I feel like Clytemnestra is a name that is pretty usually spelled with a C and some E's in there and then an A at the end. And this one is Clytaimestra.
And that's because Carson is doing well, do you know why?
I would assume she's doing a more I'm assuming that the one we have is influenced by Latin and this is more directly from the Greek if I had to guess.
Absolutely correct. Carson is doing what's called
Yes.
transliteration, which is separate from translation. Translation is translating like
Mhm.
one word into another. Transliteration is when you're trying to get the spelling of a word from like one alphabet to
Mhm.
another. So Clytemnestra's name in the original language begins with a kappa, which looks like the letter
Mhm.
K. And so Carson spells it with a
Mhm.
K and so on and so forth.
I think it's fascinating that the only reason we have the letter K is because Romans really wanted to be able to write Greek words. Yeah, it's fun to see these kind of things though. They're like it's just this she spells that one a bit oddly, which I don't think that one has as much of a settled spelling, but that one I was like, "Wait, who?" And then I was like, "Oh, just this Mr. Fair Dude."
And she spells just what we're talking about, like she spells Aeschylus, AiskhYlos, which like I wouldn't even know how to try to pronounce that,
I'm gonna
you
be
know?
so real, I did not know who she was talking about as first.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's so valid. That is not your fault.
It is funny though because like in my notes, in your notes, we use the other spelling of Clytemnestra. I don't know. You spelled Electra with a
Yeah.
C. I think I went back and forth in my notes with a C or a K for Electra, which I've seen both of those pretty a lot, so that's not weird for me.
When you said like something in your outline, I was like, "Oh no, did I forget to change the word Aaron to Jane somewhere?" Aaron is on a camping trip. I love him dearly, but I will not be attempting to edit out the sound of the wind from a recording that's like an hour
Yeah,
long.
no, I would not expect that of you. That is rotten work, and even to you, even if it's him. um,
And with that, we'll see you next time. Um, Next time, we will be discussing The Road by Cormac McCarthy, a novel about a father and son traveling the world after the apocalypse.